On November 19, 2019, the director of the Federal Bureau of Prisons, Kathleen Hawke Sawyer, sat before the Senate Judiciary Committee. The topic was prison oversight, but everyone knew what it was really about. Jeffrey Epstein.
The senators didn't dance around it, they wanted answers. How does the most high-profile inmate in federal custody end up dead under your watch?
Sawyer said she was shocked. She called Epstein's death a black eye on the system. But when pressed on who was accountable, the answers were vague. She said mistakes were made. Staff were overworked. Protocols weren't followed. But nobody could say why the security cameras failed or why the guards falsified records. Senator Lindsey Graham asked if Epstein could have been murdered. Sawyer admitted, "The FBI is investigating." That was as far as it went. It wasn't satisfying. No one left that room feeling like they got the full story. Just a string of broken procedures and a system that didn't do its job. For many watching, it felt like the first and last time Epstein's death would face public questioning. The trail, once again, seemed to vanish behind closed doors.
So welcome. I have a very brief opening statement. Dr. Sawyer, thank you for coming. Get you sworn in here in a moment, but it's important that we have this oversight hearing. I think there will be a couple of areas of inquiry, all things Jeffrey Epstein,
Okay.
and hopefully about the implementation of the First Steps Act. And where could we go from there? How could you build upon that? Those are the three areas that I would like to talk about. I'll turn it over to Senator Feinstein.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to welcome you.
Thank you, Senator.
It's wonderful for me to see a woman in charge, and so we can celebrate it for a few moments at least. You are responsible for the care and custody of over 180,000 federal inmates and one of the Justice Department's largest employers, with approximately 35,500 employees as of May of this year. And as the chairman mentioned, there are two issues I hope we can focus on. One is the First Step Act, which he mentioned, and the second is problems with staffing and conditions within your department. I'm going to put most of this in the record, but I think what I'll do, Mr. Chairman, in the interest of time, is just put the statement in the record.
Without objection. Senator Durbin, did you want to say something?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Last year, Congress came together to pass what I consider to be one of the most important criminal justice reform laws in a generation. The First Step Act, passed by overwhelming bipartisan majorities and signed by President Trump. We now have an obligation to ensure that this law be properly implemented. I thank Chairman Graham for holding this hearing at my request, but I'm disappointed that the Department of Justice refused our committee's bipartisan request to testify today. This is one of the many troubling signs the Department of Justice is not on board in implementing the First Step Act. The Fair Sentencing Act of 2010, which I co-authored with Senators Grassley and Lee, dramatically reduced the unjust crack powder disparity from 100 to 1 down to 18 to 1. But the Department of Justice is resisting retroactive Fair Sentencing Act relief for eligible individuals, and in some cases even working to put them back behind bars. I wrote the provision of the First Step Act that reduces these unjust sentences for nonviolent offenders, and the position that the Justice Department is taking is just plain wrong. The Department of Justice should be working to identify eligible individuals and get them out, not wasting valuable resources to keep them behind bars. So far, at least 1,600 people have been released because of the retroactive application of the Fair Sentencing Act. There should be more. I'd like to recognize, Mr. Chairman, two visitors who are here today. They have benefited, one has benefited from the First Step Act. In particular, I'd like to recognize my constituent, Edward Douglas, and his exceptional lawyer, my angel Cody, who are here today. Thank you for joining us. Could you raise your hands? Thank you for being here. Edward Douglas received a life sentence triggered by 2 minor nonviolent drug convictions. He served 16 years in prison, became one of the first people released under the First Step Act. Given a second chance, Edward and others who have joined us today are making our criminal system, justice system, better and more just. It's worth all of our time and effort it took to pass the First Step Act. I hope it will inspire all of us to search a little harder for bipartisan solutions and the Department of Justice to change its mind and join us. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Dr. Sawyer joined the Bureau of Prisons in 1976 as a psychologist at Federal Correctional Institute, Morgantown. In 1983, she was named the Chief of Psychological Services. She has had increasing responsibilities since then. She was previously served as Director of Bureau of Prisons from 1992 to 2003. She was reappointed as Director in August of this year. Would you please rise?
Yes, sir. Oops.
Raise your hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give this committee is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but truth, so help you God?
I do, sir.
Welcome, and the floor is yours.
Good morning. Good morning, Chairman Graham and Ranking Member Feinstein and members of the committee. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss with you today the mission and operations of the Bureau of Prisons. I thank the committee for your work with the Bureau over many years. Your support has been integral to our operations for many decades, including our years of tremendous population growth, rapid expansion, and opening of many new institutions. I also thank you and your colleagues for your groundbreaking criminal justice work through the bipartisan support of the First Step Act. I look forward today to sharing with you our progress in implementing this critical piece of legislation. Programming to assist inmates in returning to their communities as law-abiding citizens has always been a cornerstone of our mission. In fact, we have long held that an inmate's reentry journey begins the very day they arrive in our custody. With the First Step Act, we look forward to further enriching the offerings to help improve the lives of our inmates, thereby help keep our communities safer. I was honored 3 months ago to be selected by Attorney General Barr to return to lead the Bureau and to work alongside the finest correctional professionals in the world. I began my career as a psychology intern at one of our prisons and held positions of increasing responsibility to include warden, associate warden, before my original appointment as the Bureau's 6th director in 1992, a position I held until my retirement in 2003. While much has changed in the 16 years that I was outside of the Bureau and since I last served as director, the foundation of the Bureau is still quite sound. But we have been challenged significantly by the dramatic growth we experienced, commensurate with the significant budget cuts that followed the tragedy of 9/11, when the focus shift came from crime to terrorism, and our budget then suffered severely after that period. Our over 35,000 staff play a critical role in the federal criminal justice system, yet the great work our staff does every day goes largely unseen by the general public. This inherently dangerous work, particularly at our highest security institutions where our most dangerous inmates serve, is a responsibility we take very, very seriously. Unfortunately, we've experienced significant staff shortages that make our job even more difficult. In my first 12 weeks, I have placed great emphasis on filling our almost over 3,000 vacancies nationwide. Since returning as director, I've mobilized a thorough systems of overview to identify areas of strength and weakness, and have identified 3 significant areas that need emphasis. One is staffing, one is training, and the third is an emphasis and a recommitment to the basics of sound correctional practice. Our system is the largest in the nation, housing roughly 176,000 inmates across the entire Bureau of Prisons. And this return to the bedrock of sound corrections is critical to ensure that our staff nationwide are following the policies and procedures that keep staff, inmates, and the public safe. The Bureau, like corrections nationwide, also continues to face dangerous security threats from the introduction of contraband. Synthetic drugs, illicit narcotics, and contraband cell phones are some of the chief threats. The use of drones to drop contraband onto prison grounds is an ongoing problem that continues to evolve. We have deployed contraband detecting technologies. We continue to leverage the new technologies and cutting-edge solutions to effectively detect and interdict prison contraband. Our aging infrastructure is another concern. Almost half of our prisons are over 30 years old, and some, like Leavenworth, Atlanta, Lewisburg, date back to over 80 years old, to our earliest periods of corrections. Prison facilities are subjected to much heavier than normal wear since they are continuously used 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And this aging infrastructure affects institution security as critical systems sustain extensive wear and tear, as well as premature deterioration. The implementation of the First Step Act is a priority for the Bureau of Prisons, and I am pleased to report that we have made great progress. We have updated policies and are implementing the many requirements of the Act. We are working very closely with the Department of Justice and the Independent Review Committee on the new risk and needs assessment the Act requires. We've listened to the important comments from many interested stakeholders, from crime victims to a broad array of advocacy groups. The statutory timelines in this Act are very formidable, but I am proud to say that the Bureau and the Department have met key deadlines, particularly the release of the new risk and needs assessment system, and we continue to remain focused on the full and balanced implementation of the First Step Act. This concludes my formal statement, and I would be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, thank you very much. As I indicated in my opening statement, I wanted to talk about the death of Mr. Epstein. Do you concur with the opinion that it was a suicide?
That was the finding of the coroner, sir.
Okay. Do you have any evidence to suggest otherwise?
I do not.
How could this have happened?
Unfortunately, sir, the death and the whole situation is still under the investigation of the FBI and the Inspector General's office, and I'm really not at liberty to discuss specifics of this case. I can discuss issues around institutional operations, but I can't specifically talk about that particular issue.
Okay. With a case this high profile, there's got to be either a major malfunction of the system or a criminal enterprise at foot to allow this to happen. So are you looking at both? Is the FBI looking at both?
If the FBI is involved, then they are looking at criminal enterprise, yes.
Do we have people in custody today of this high-profile nature? Have we done anything to adjust since Mr. Epstein's death?
Sir, we take every inmate's life very seriously in the Bureau of Prisons. A high-profile inmate is no more important or significant in terms of our operations than just the average inmate that comes our way.
When I mean high-profile, somebody's on a suicide watch.
I would like to explain our suicide watch system, if I may. I can't talk specifically about Epstein, but we have different tiers of response if we identify an inmate who appears to be having suicidal thinking. And I came into the Bureau as a psychologist. I worked with lots of suicidal inmates. I was warden in our psychiatric facility in Butner, and I know how difficult it is to always be able to predict who is suicidal and who is not. But once an inmate is identified as potentially suicidal, we have a suicide watch operation that we can place them in. It's a very stark, very difficult setting where everything is stripped from the room except a mattress. They get a coarse gown-like to wear that cannot be twisted in any way that they could hang themselves from it. They have one mattress and one blanket, and they are watched constantly. There's nothing else in that room.
Was Mr. Epstein on suicide watch?
Yes, he was. However, the average time on suicide watch is only about 24 hours because it is such a stark and actually depressing situation. We then can move them to another tier of observation, which is called psychological observation.
Did that happen in this case?
I can't speak specifically, but I am sharing this with you so that you understand our procedure, sir. They then can move to another tier, which is psychological observation, where they get their clothes back. They're in a more normalized setting. They are watched and scrutinized every moment of the day, but that is a much more normal environment.
Do they have roommates?
I'm sorry, sir?
Do they have roommates?
No, they do not when they're on psychological observation because they're being watched continuously.
Did Mr. Epstein have a roommate when he allegedly committed suicide?
No, he did not.
Okay. But
they move into psychological observation. Psychologists see them routinely, interview them repeatedly, and once it's determined that the threat of suicide seems to have passed, then that inmate can be returned back to open population.
well, clearly it didn't work here, so we await the report because all the victims of Mr. Epstein have to have their heart ripped out, else they'll never see justice. Parole. When was parole alleviated from the federal system?
Ooh, I became director in '92, and parole was already gone for new cases. There still had the old cases that had to move on. So it was like the late '80s, early '90s. Parole was removed.
Parole eliminated?
You would have to ask Congress, sir. I mean, it was the bodies up here that made that decision.
Okay. Do you have any recommendations as to whether or not we should look at reinstituting parole at the federal level?
I'm encouraged by the First Step Act, sir. What happened when we lost
How
parole?
would the First Step Act be different than parole?
Well, it would be significantly different in one respect, but the respect that I was going to comment on is that parole gave inmates an incentive to want to do well. They wanted to get involved in programs, they wanted to do positive things because they saw the benefit in that and that they could earn earlier release from prison, for sure, if their hearing with the Parole Commission was favorable. What First Step Act has done now, it's offered some new incentives for inmates to want to perform well, to want to engage in programs, because we have a lot of programs out there for the past many years, and the numbers enrolled in them were never as high as we were hoping for, because a lot of times the inmates, if they were doing long time, they didn't see real benefit for them. So First Step Act helps in that regard, that it incentivizes inmates to want to improve themselves and want to move forward in their lives.
What system would give the most flexibility in terms of deciding who to release? If somebody's been there 25 or 30 years on a 40 or 50-year sentence, parole would act differently than the First Step, is that correct?
Well, the Parole Act, parole allows a parole commission, a group of people to interview an inmate periodically at different points in their career in our institutions, and they would look at their progress, how they have done, how they have benefited, and whether they appear to be a recidivism risk in the future.
Push or review, should we reinstate parole at the federal level?
You know, I've not really thought about that, Senator, but we'd be happy to do that, step back and kind of look at parole and First Step.
If you could let me know, I think it's something we should look at.
Yeah, we'd be happy to review that.
Okay, thank you, Senator.
Give you our comments.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. On November 17th, the New York Times published a story titled Hazing, Humiliation, Terror, Working While Female in the Federal Prison. Now, given the fact, and I wrote this in a letter to Mr. Horowitz in November of last year, that the Bureau has been on notice since 2010 that it was clear at that time that sufficient steps were not taken to protect female guards. And I requested that the Department of Justice's IG investigate the Bureau's failure to adequately address the harassment of female guards, and ask that the IG look into the situation. What is the situation today, and what has been done to address this issue?
Senator, when you have women, and I'm obviously a woman and I worked in prison for over 30 years now, when you have women in prison with all male inmates in male institutions, you've got a lot of knuckleheads in that institution. I mean, just as a woman on a metro car has to be careful here in D.C. that a guy's not going to move up against them and try to touch them, or you walk down the street and you get catcalls from workers on the side. There are knuckleheads all over the place in terms of the way men treat women. You're going to find them in our institutions also. Let me just finish my thought. And so there are going to be times when the inmates behave very inappropriately to our female staff. And our female staff need to stand up boldly and address that. The problem with the sexual harassment issues were raised that troubled me gravely was when the female staff did not feel that the male staff, their male counterparts, were coming to their assistance and their aid. That's where we dropped the ball in the Bureau. We can't always control the behavior of inmates because they're in institutions. What do they have to lose? If you write them an incident report, you put them in special housing for a little while, they come back. But the part of this that very angered me tremendously was when the staff, female staff, felt that the male staff were not stepping up to help them. And so that's where our attention has been, with educating all of our staff out there that we are all colleagues, we all need to be treated professionally. It is never okay to allow anyone to disrespect our other colleagues. And so that's where our action, we now have different types of incident reports we can write against the inmates, and we hold the rest of our staff accountable to assist each other.
Let me ask you this question.
Yes, ma'am.
Today, do managers separate a female correctional staff officer from a senior officer who made sexual comments and propositions?
Yes, whenever we become aware of a situation, we do a threat assessment, and we determine whether or not those two individuals, while it's being investigated, whether they can continue to work together in the same environment. And if there's any concern, then they are separated.
So what exactly has been done to remedy that situation?
Well, as I said, we've increased the...
How many have you separated, and what have you done?
I don't have the numbers with me, but we can get those for you, ma'am, and get them up to you, Senator. But we have increased the penalties on the inmates who behave that way. We've educated our staff in terms of that being inappropriate conduct to not support your colleagues. And if we find male staff members or female staff members that may do the same thing, then we will take action on those, have those situations investigated, and take appropriate action, because that is absolutely absolutely unacceptable.
Well, I would like to see the documentation of what you have done in that regard, and so I request it now. In my past, I served 6 years on the California Women's Board of Terms and Parole. We set sentences, we granted paroles, and we ran the women's prison. And so I know a little bit about prisons. And I've been in a large number, everyone in California, as a matter of fact. So I am concerned about this on the federal level. I think it's vague and imprecise. Yes. And I would like to know exactly what has happened and what has been done to remedy the situation. And if you could provide that to me, I would be very grateful for it.
I share your concern, Senator, and we will get the information that we have to you.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
Before I ask questions, I'm not going to ask these groups to stand, but I want to thank people that supported the First Step Act for coming here for this hearing. Cut 50, Due Process Institute, Families Against Mandatory Minimums, and Council of Local Prison Locals. Before I get to some questions about the First Step Act, I want to comment because some critics of the First Step Act have noted the case of Joel Francisco, a prisoner in New Jersey, who was released as a result of an adjustment in the way crack cocaine sentences are calculated, making these sentences closer in length to those imposed for powder cocaine. In October, Francisco was arrested for first-degree murder. Question, Francisco would have gotten out of prison even without the First Step Act, is that correct?
Eventually, yes, sir.
Would you agree that the First Step Act will help prevent the crimes like this in the future by steering more prisoners away from future criminal conduct?
I would hope so, sir.
Okay. Now, in regard to the First Step Act enforcement, and I want to compliment the people at Thompson Prison where Senator Durbin and I visited a couple months ago. For what I get from them is a real good faith effort to carry out. So my question is, since the First Step Act seeks to reduce recidivism among nonviolent offenders, Congress passed this law with the intent that the Bureau of Prisons develop a risk and needs assessment tool to measure a prisoner's risk of recidivism and then determine programs the prisoner should be enrolled in to reduce recidivism. A tool was released in July, but the Justice Department has acknowledged that the job is only half done because Bureau of Prisons tools, quote, does not include a needs assessment component. So question, when can we expect Bureau of Prisons to comply with the First Step Act requirement to create and implement needs tools, assessment tools?
Senator, we've been working very closely with the department, both in the development of the risk assessment. The pattern program that has come out is actually is based on our own Bravo system that was recidivism based. They've tweaked it and improved it somewhat, and that is now the pattern system, which is the risk assessment. We have a needs assessment in the Bureau of Prisons that we've been using for years. It doesn't quite meet the really stringent bar that we'd like for it to for the First Step Act, but we're not required to have it completely finished until the end of next year. With the time frame that's laid out, we will be initiating the risk assessment come January 15th, which is the requirement of the First Step Act. We will also be initiating our needs assessment at that same time to assess inmates' needs. But we will be continuing to tweak our needs assessment program to make sure that it's very, very explicit and precise on evaluating the needs of inmates. It's going to involve psychological evaluation in terms of needs, educational assessment in terms of needs, healthcare needs. All of those are identified right now with our existing needs assessment, but you've set a high bar with this First Step Act, and we want to achieve it completely. So we will continue to tweak and improve our needs assessment process throughout as we implement it during this first year to get it as absolutely accurate and high standards it can possibly be, sir.
In doing this evidence-based programming as a way of reducing recidivism, how will the Bureau of Prisons ensure that it gives opportunities for faith-based groups to provide programming to prisoners?
Our faith-based programs are very critical to our operations, Senator. Most of those, we have religious services programs in every institution with multiple faith-based groups represented, but what we rely on tremendously are our volunteers, individuals who come in from the community of all the different faith groups to provide for the needs of our inmates. We have 11,000 volunteers that come into our institutions right now, and the vast majority of those are faith-based groups. We have a few it's hard to say, faith-based groups that have stepped up with some broader programs they would like to offer in our institutions, and we're advising them on how they can enter their program into this evaluation that's going to be done through the Department of Justice and outside evaluators to determine which ones truly have evidence that they do reduce recidivism, and those that meet that criteria, we would love to have them come into our institutions and run their programs. So our faith-based programs are very critical to our overall operation of improving the lives of inmates.
I'll have to submit a lot of questions for answer in writing because I have more questions on this subject.
Very good, Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me say at the outset, I'm glad you're here, Dr. Sawyer. I'm glad you came out of retirement to take on this responsibility. I enjoyed our meeting and look forward to working with you. I also want to acknowledge the role played by our colleagues on the committee of Senator Cornyn, Senator Whitehouse in the First Step Act, particularly in the area of prison reform. They were leaders on this, and I want to acknowledge that. The First Step Act aims to improve public safety by strengthening the capacity of the Bureau of Prisons to rehabilitate inmates. To do this, the First Step Act requires the Department of Justice to develop a scoring system to assess every inmate's risk of recidivism and to identify their programming and treatment needs. Now, the scoring system and where you start off on it makes all the difference in the world. Sure. If you're viewed as a high-risk inmate, then you have many programs ahead of you before you'll be considered for release or particular treatment when it comes to the issue of recidivism. That's why I'm particularly sorry the Department of Justice refused to come to this hearing today. It is critical that this system that they're putting together be transparent, accurate, and unbiased. But I'm concerned that the system the Department of Justice has created falls well short of that mark. I have a poster that I want to show you here. We talked about this in my office.
Yes, sir.
At this moment in our nation's history, when the clash of race and justice graphically confronts us every single day, the foundation of this scoring system is so stark, so sobering, and so fundamentally unfair that it cannot stand without challenge. The Department of Justice itself forecasts that the risk assessment tool will result in stunning racial disparities in inmate security classification. In a test run of the tool, which is demonstrated here, over half, 53% of the African American men in the sample were designated high risk, compared to only 29% of white men. 30% of white men were classified as minimum risk, compared to only 7% of African American men. Part of the problem is the tool doesn't distinguish between a traffic stop and a murder conviction. It simply measures the risk that someone will be arrested or returned to the federal system. And an arrest is not a new crime. A conviction is a new crime. And whether you're arrested often has more to do with your zip code many times and skin color than your predisposition toward crime or committing another crime. Dr. Sawyer, will you commit that the Department of Justice risk assessment tool will be revised to define recidivism more narrowly and that you'll explore other changes needed to correct these stunning racial disparities?
Senator, I want to clarify a point that I think was confusing when we talked the other day. We are not, the Department of Justice nor the Bureau of Prisons are using arrests in terms of the initial risk assessment that's applied for each inmate. We're using the United States Sentencing Commission's criminal history record, and that is only convictions. Only convictions. And I think that's what you and I were talking about the other day, was the front end coming in, whether we use arrests. What your staff member and my staff member got into were more the researchers on this. They were talking about using arrests on the back end to evaluate recidivism. And that arrests are only used on the back end that says if an inmate gets out and is arrested or returns to custody or convicted, then that adds to the validation appraisal of the risk assessment tool. But what you and I were concerned about was the ones coming on the front end. They will not be utilizing arrests for that.
I understand this distinction, but I still raise the same point on back-end evaluation that an arrest is not a conviction.
Absolutely, sir.
And when we're talking about driving while black, driving while this and that, I mean, let's be very honest and candid about what we face in this country today. And the notion that an arrest of an African-American man after circumstances that we've described here is still too prevalent. We have a long way to go. Do you agree with me?
I agree with you, sir. And it won't, if we count an arrest as a recidivism on Joe Smith, it won't affect Joe Smith. It really affects the overall numbering. There's still a flaw in it, and I agree with you, and it's the research flaw in terms of how we count. The problem is most everyone in the country defines recidivism based on arrests and convictions. But I assure you, Senator, we are to review this risk assessment and check the validation every year, and then there's an outside group that's going to come in every 5 years and evaluate the validation and look for exactly things like that, and I assure you we will do that.
I want the starting place on this, this stark racial disparity to be the first thing that you'll promise me you'll look at.
Absolutely.
If we don't get that right, nothing else is right about this system. Nothing else is right about this.
I agree with you absolutely.
Now I just have a few seconds, and I want to hit this point quickly with a second chart here. Part of bringing these inmates into a position where there's less recidivism so that they are rehabilitated means putting the services in front of them that they need while they're incarcerated to make a difference. The Department of Justice reported that out of 222,000 former prisoners, what you can see here is that 49% did not complete any kind of programming, 82% received no technical or vocational courses, 92% did not participate in UNICOR, 57% completed no drug treatment during incarceration. When Senator Grassley and I visited Thompson Prison, which is in my state, proud to have it, thank you, but is the second most restrictive federal facility beyond Florence, Colorado, we asked, what do you have in place? Well, they're still waiting. I mean, it's very early in the game, I get it. But there's nothing that indicates the dedication of resources to make sure that these inmates have a fighting chance to turn their lives around and to be released under circumstances where recidivism doesn't take place. Do you agree that we need more resources in these programs?
Senator, I do, and I would invite all the members of this committee to visit our institutions, because you will find that every one of our institutions, other than the super highly secure ones like ADX Florence and your new Thompson, but we have vocational education programs in we have 86 residential drug treatment programs across the 122 prisons in the Bureau of Prisons. We have vocational training programs, education programs. The problem, as I mentioned earlier, is that oftentimes the inmates choose not to get involved in some of those because they saw no benefit in it for themselves. And we cannot force, by court law, we cannot force an inmate into a treatment program. My hope is with this new First Step Act, there's incentivizing there that's going to occur for the inmates to see some benefit in them getting involved. Federal Prison Industries is one of the best programs in the Bureau of Prisons. When I was here before as director, we had 28,000 inmates in Federal Prison Industries. We now have 11,000 because we have been cut so badly in terms of our authorities by people on the Hill here, in the House and the Senate, because there was so much concern that we might take a job away from a private citizen. And I shared that concern, but we make 80-some different product lines. We can't hurt any one industry very much at all, but we have been cut from 28,000 to 11,000 inmates in prison industries. And so I assure you, Senator, our only limitation on providing programs for these inmates will be resources. As long as we have sufficient resources, we have never had adequate resources to provide all the programs for all the inmates. I'm hoping that that will change now. Since you all support the First Step Act, I'm hoping the resources will come along with that to ensure we have these programs available. And our problem at Thompson, as you know, sir, we're having great difficulty hiring the treatment staff. We put out so many requests and advertisements for jobs for the psychologists and psychological treatment specialists that we need to run some of these specialized programs at Thompson. We're not getting takers, and we're just going to keep plugging at it. We will get them filled, but it's just taking us a while.
Senator Sass.
Thank you, Chairman. Dr. Sawyer, can you think of any other incidents in the history of the BOP that have caused as much crisis for public trust for your institution as Epstein's death?
I can only speak for since 1976 when I joined the Bureau. I don't know prior to that, but I would say it's probably gotten the most public attention.
There are lots of taxpayers and citizens who've never thought about the BOP, and you have lots of good, patriotic, hardworking folks there. I get that. But in terms of a crisis of public trust in general, but also in terms of your workforce, this death happened in the middle of August, early August. It's Thanksgiving, and you're here to testify today, and you say you're not allowed to speak about this incident. I think that's crazy. Can you distinguish among types of investigations, at least for us? Because I'm aware of at least 3 Epstein investigations. You got a whole bunch of women who were raped by this guy. This is a sex trafficking ring in the United States. This guy had evidence. He's got co-conspirators, and there are victims out there who want to know where the evidence has gone. Can you tell us a little bit more about the different investigations? I understand there's at least one that you're directed by Main Justice not to speak about, but there are at least 3 investigations. Can you unpack them, please?
There are 2 investigations that are ongoing. One is the FBI's investigation, and the other is the Inspector General's investigation.
Both inside BOP, but there's a third one outside, which is why Epstein was in your institution to begin with.
Yeah, and that, sir, is completely out of my
I get that. There's a lot here where DOJ has failed. There's a lot here that BOP has failed. Let's just be clear so we have a level set for everybody in this room. You're in your job because of this crisis, right? You come here today and you say you can't testify about it, but the reason you're director now is because the last guy got fired, right?
Senator, I can't tell you what I don't know. I have received no information from the FBI investigation yet, nor no information from the Inspector General. Once those entities go into one of our facilities, we are forbidden from talking to anybody in the institution. We can send in a team and look at wherever there might have been a security flaw or something, but we are not allowed to talk to anybody in our institutions about anything that happened over the Epstein.
With all due respect, you still have an obligation to speak to the girls who were raped by this guy today. You may not have to speak about every particular of the guards that were arrested last night, but the fact that there is an ongoing attempt by the United States government to find out if there's still any evidence about the co-conspirators, you do have an obligation to speak to those girls who were raped today. You may not speak about the specifics of the charges against those 2 guards this morning who were taken into custody, but more broadly, you should be able to unpack, have we changed any processes about how cases like this are handled? It's been more than 90 days, and you said, I think your quote was, we treat every inmate the same. We believe in America that every individual has equal dignity, but not every inmate has equal value for future criminal investigations. Jeffrey Epstein was still to testify in a case. Somebody who's already been convicted, who may be on suicide watch, there are lots of good reasons to not want that guy to be able to kill himself. This is different because it isn't just about the individual inmate who might kill themselves. It's about the fact that that bastard wasn't able to testify against his other co-conspirators. So it is wrong as a management matter for you to say we treat everybody the same. We should be treating people who are yet to testify against other felons, against other rapists. They have a lot more priority for your institution, don't they?
Senator, pretty much all of our inmates that are in any of our jail facilities are pretrial. They're still yet to testify, to be involved, to share information on other cases. I don't know what evidence you're asking of me. If you're saying, was there any evidence in his room, in his possession at the time?
No,
that was all confiscated by the FBI.
In his brain and in the cameras and in the tapes that the American public well understands appear to not be urgent enough for the Department of Justice.
No, it's very urgent for the Department of Justice, and it's all been confiscated by the FBI, and it's all part of their investigation. That's why none of that is shared with the Director of the Bureau of Prisons or anyone in the Bureau until the investigations are completed. Once those are completed, I'd be very happy to come up here and talk with any one of you that want to hear everything about we glean from those investigations. But until I have that information, there's nothing I can tell you. If I don't have the information, I cannot share anything with you.
Then how widespread is the problem of sleeping on the job? There are lots of people in the public who think this seems a very convenient excuse. And so tell us, is it a systemic problem? Do we have a lot of people who sleep on the job when they're supposed to be guarding federal inmates?
We have a few, sir, and we have been monitoring the cameras that are existing in every one of our institutions to determine how well and how effectively our inmates are, our staff members are doing their rounds and counts in the institutions. We have found a couple of other instances, and we have immediately referred those to the Inspector General's office, and I'm encouraging that if people just chose not to do their job, we're hoping the U.S. Attorney's Office will pick up those cases and prosecute them for us, because we don't want those people in the Bureau of Prisons. They are dangerous to everybody, the inmates and the staff. And so we are zealously going about trying to determine which of our employees are good employees and who do their job, and that is the vast majority of the prison staff. But we do have some, I know, out there who obviously choose not to follow policy, choose not to do their job, and we want them gone. I do not want them in our institutions, and I am exploring those very, very carefully to identify them and get them out of our system. Now, if it's a training problem and they didn't know what they were supposed to do, that's our problem. That's management's problem. We have to do a better job training our staff. But if someone is well-trained, well-experienced, and chooses not to do their job, we want them gone. I assure you of that.
I'm at time, so I'll just give you a preview of something I'm going to ask you for the record after the event. You made a really important statement about drone drops of different kinds of contraband into your institutions. That's obviously a new and hard problem. That's a problem against which we have to play defense, but there's also new opportunities for offense. And so what your long-term strategy is inside the institution about cameras is something that I think a lot of us would like to hear more, and I'll send you a letter with some questions. Because Epstein's hallway should have still been monitored by cameras, even if his guards were asleep, and we don't have information about whether or not there were adequate cameras there. And so I think a lot of us would like to understand where technology dollars are going.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Dr.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Blumenthal's next, but just follow up on this. Will there be an IG report regarding what happened?
There should be. Usually after the Inspector General's office investigates, they do come out with a report.
If people are pending criminal charges, we're not going to interfere in their cases, but if there's an IG report, I promise you we'll get fully briefed by the committee here. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for your service.
Thank you, sir.
I share the sense of outrage and urgency about this issue, not because of any special caring about Mr. Epstein, but he was a source of evidence to hold accountable other criminals who are as culpable, co-conspirators in exploiting women, and the suicide deprives them of their day in court and of justice and accountability. And so I would like to suggest, Mr. Chairman, that we have an oversight hearing directed specifically at this problem relating to Mr. Epstein, and also more broadly about the problems of proper surveillance and proper oversight. I think it ought to be bipartisan, and the testimony today suggests that you're as equally troubled about this issue, and I would like to ask for your cooperation and your commitment that you will cooperate in that oversight hearing.
Absolutely, sir.
When will the Inspector General report be done?
We never know that. They keep telling us soon, 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 but I don't know what that means. You know, they take the amount of time they need to do a thorough investigation, and I never know when that's going to end.
Well, I am going to write a letter, and I hope that others will join me in urging the Inspector General to complete this report as expeditiously as possible. There's been plenty of time for him to interview, review documents. The documents that evidently were falsified are not numerous. We're not talking about tons of written documents or testimony, and I think that Inspector General report ought to be due next week.
Yes, sir.
And I'm going to be writing to the Inspector General. I hope colleagues will join me in that letter. Do you know, in fact, have you reviewed, in fact, the documents that allegedly were falsified?
No, I've not been allowed to see anything. Once the FBI and the IG steps in, then we're not allowed to interview people, we're not allowed to do anything, so that we don't in any way bias the interview or bias the investigation or infect it in any way. So I have not seen any of that.
Are rates of suicide in prison higher than in the general population?
You know, they are, but in our system, they are really not. Our system are, if you talk about jail facilities, like the high-rise MCCs around the country, the average rate of suicide in a jail facility around the country is 50 per 100,000. If you look at our numbers in our jail facilities in the last year, we had 2. And unfortunately, one of those was an extraordinarily high-profile case, and it makes everyone paint the Bureau of Prisons with that broad brush of incompetence across our system. And we've lost 2 inmates to suicide in our jail facilities, where the norm was really 100 inmates if you do it per 100,000, because the 50 per 100,000. In our regular institutions, our rate is 13 per 100,000, and if you look at the state systems across the country, they run 20-something.
Have there been specific changes in policy and practice as a result of the Epstein suicide?
Policy minimal because our policies are sound. Our problem is that when we grew so dramatically, when I was director, we went from 60,000 inmates to 180. We went from 15,000 staff to 30,000. That growth is tremendous. We were getting decent budgets during that period. Once I left, we had to grow by 47,000 more inmates with only 7,000 new staff. That means 7 staff members for every 1,000 inmates we had to absorb into the Bureau of Prisons. In 1 year alone, we were required to open 10 new institutions with 3,000 less positions than we had had year before. That's a 6,000 drop in position coverage that we had across our Bureau. What happens when you're stretched so thin is staff have to make it work because we can't control our population. We don't control who all comes into our institutions or when they leave. We just have to keep taking them and taking them and taking them. And we grew so big with so few staff that we were stretched to our limits.
I'm going to interrupt you because
but my point is that policies were sound, staff don't always follow them because they were stretched too thin, sir.
Thank you. On a separate issue, a report by the Department of Justice Office of Inspector General in August of 2016 found that private prisons had serious problems and more frequent reports of violence that could cause deaths of inmates. The report analyzed 14 private prisons and 14 public prisons between 2011 and 2014 and found more safety and security incidents per capita in the private facilities than the Bureau of Prison-run facilities.
Right.
But a memo in January of 2018 by Assistant Director for Correctional Programs, Frank Lara, indicated that the use of private prisons would in fact be increasing. Do you have plans to increase the use of private prisons?
We do not have plans to increase them, but if I may say, Senator, that's the exact, your citation of problems is exactly why we will only put low security inmates in private prisons. We will not put medium and high security inmates because I think private prisons are not adequate in dealing with very serious offenders. We have always only put low security inmates in our private prisons because they do not pose the kind of risks that higher security inmates do. The private prisons were a great boon for us, for our lower security inmates when we were growing so dramatically. We could not build prisons fast enough to take all the inmates that were coming our way. And the private prisons gave us that buffer for the lower security inmates. We are down now to only having 16,000 out of 177,000 inmates in our private institutions. And those numbers keep coming down, 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 down. And I think there will be a day, as long as we don't get another huge increase in population, where we will no longer be needing private prisons.
I'm going to stop here because my time has expired. I do have a few more questions that I'll put in the record.
Okay.
One of them concerns, and you mentioned faith-based programs being important, the denial of opportunities to worship to Muslim prisoners in the Danbury FCI is the subject of a lawsuit, and I'd like to know the explanation for why they've been denied that opportunity to
Very good,
worship.
sir.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ranking Member. I appreciate the testimony today, and I'd like to go back and talk a little bit about the faith-based programs that you discussed earlier. Could you talk a little bit about those faith-based programs? And as described earlier, are you offering equal time regardless of demand or number of volunteers? Are you equally offering those programs across to your inmates?
Yes, Senator, we are required by law to do that. I mean, we have to cover all the potential faith-based followers of all the many different faith groups. We have Indian sweat lodges. We have imams coming into our institutions. We have folks from many of the religious groups that most of us in this room will have never heard of. We also have to provide them for Wiccas and atheists. And with the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, we are required to meet the demands of every faith that any inmate comes our way with. And we obviously try to meet those in a very equitable manner. Now, obviously, when you have huge numbers of one faith group and one or two in another, I can't tell you they always get exactly the same number of hours of programming available because the volunteers may not be able to come in as frequently, because we can use multiple different faith groups to address our Christian inmates, for example, or our Jewish inmates, but you have a limited number of volunteers you can bring in for your Native American or your Wiccas or whatever it might be. But our goal is to be equitable across the board.
Okay, no, that's good, and that's the way it's supposed to be and,
Yes,
and supposed to run. Do you have a limit then on the number of volunteers that are coming in for those programs? It's open-ended?
It's limited maybe at one time, how many can come in at one time, because we require our chaplains usually to be the ones who oversee those programs and are careful for security. We may use some extra correctional officers to help us cover those. So we probably, I would assume, have limits on how many can come in at one particular time, but we're very open to new volunteers and new programs all the time.
And then as part of that volunteer process, what would a volunteer have to do? Are there regulations that have to be met for all of those volunteers? Are they supervised?
Yes.
How does that work?
Yeah, there are security requirements that we have to meet. They have to go through a minimal background check to make sure that they're not, going to pose any security threat. We also require them to attest in writing that they have no animosity toward the government. They are not going to be pushing any ideology that is counter to our country, and then we do have security. They are screened when they come into the institution, make sure they're not bringing in any contraband or any items they should not be bringing in. And then there is always a staff member present near the area, if not specifically in the area, whether that's a chaplain or it's a correctional officer, to guard to make sure that nothing untoward is occurring during that program.
Good, and thank you for that. And then outside of those that are religiously affiliated, there are other, the First Step Act actually expected that the Bureau of Prisons would expand its internal program offerings. And can you talk a little bit about some of the partnerships that have been developed, those external partnerships with nonprofits and various groups? Can you name a few of those and then what they're expected to contribute as far as the First Step Act?
Well, we have a number of mentors coming in. One of the First Step Act clauses talked about bringing in mentors to deal with younger offenders and to deal with others that are preparing for reentry. We have the Veterans Affairs Administration comes in to work with our veterans. We have 11,000 inmates who are veterans, and so we have a very good relationship with Veterans Affairs. Number one, to help screen to make sure that those offenders who claim to be veterans truly are. And then we offer programs. We have 3 institutions that have actual housing units that house only veterans in that housing unit, and they band together in a very strong way to support each other. We have and the Veterans Affairs programs come in at least quarterly into those institutions to meet with the veterans, to help them with reentry kinds of initiatives and those kinds of things. We have a lot of folks in in education areas that come in. Groups will come in and work either in literacy programs with our inmates, offer vocational training kinds of classes for them, offer support and guidance. We will take in most anyone who's willing to come in that meets our requirements, who have something positive to provide to the inmates. And that helps us increase our staff levels. When you have nowhere near enough staff to provide all the things we're trying to provide, our volunteers and outside groups become a tremendous resource for us to do a whole lot more than we can with the resources we have available.
Very good. I appreciate that.
Thank you, Senator.
And the First Step Act, of course, this line of questioning was really to dwell on the fact that with the First Step Act, we have a lot of different partners that are collaborating to make that transition from prison much easier for these inmates. Absolutely. And allow them to really thrive and do well once they re-enter what we would consider their civilian or normal life.
Exactly.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Director Sawyer, last month before the House Judiciary Committee, you testified that BOP, quote, targets all of our eligible inmates to go through a residential reentry program because we feel that's a good halfway step back for them. At least 75% of our inmates release and go through the halfway houses. Although based on the chart that Senator Durbin put up, it seems 75% is really a high percent of your inmates going through halfway houses. Be that as it may, halfway houses, you've testified that these reentry programs are really important. So what happened in Hawaii recently, in September 30th, 2019, the Mahoney-Holly, the only residential reentry center, RRC, in the entire state of Hawaii, made up of many islands, as you probably know, closed after providing critical transitional services for 29 years. That meant that, and it makes a huge impact, real-life impact, when a facility like this closes, because a person named Robin Kumabe, who leads a nonprofit that trains people into programs, wanted to have a person who would be eligible to go through a residential reentry program and who even had a job lined up by this nonprofit that Ms. Kumabi ran, couldn't do it. So it's not that this particular closure was as a result of lack of money, because the BOP did ask for bids. So clearly, once a facility like this closes, it is not easy to get another one up and running, but obviously these are really important to people in every state. So will you commit to reopening a residential reentry center in Hawaii?
Senator, we are just as concerned as you are about losing that halfway house at Reentry Center. As I know you are aware, and our staff came up and met with your staff just recently, the building that the other halfway house had been in ended up being sold to the city of Hawaii.
Yeah, so I understand the circumstances of this.
And then they pulled away from it. So we advertised 3 times for a new halfway house there in Honolulu and got no takers. And part of the problem is, the provider has to be cost effective for them. So we cannot commit more numbers of inmates going into the halfway house than we have releasing to the state. But let me finish if I may. We now have a proposal out that's going to end like within a month, I believe, and we believe we're going to get an acceptable bidder. What we've done was we've added a couple of things onto. There'll be the halfway house, there'll be a home confinement oversight, and then there'll be a day reporting center, which is kind of like home confinement on steroids, where they get extra oversight. So that will expand the workload that we're asking for from the halfway house. So it should make it more cost effective, because there'll be more inmates we'll be paying for. So we're very optimistic, because we want that halfway house in Hawaii too. We're very optimistic that we're going to get a bidder on this.
So that sounds like a yes to.
That's as close to a yes as I can possibly give you before I sign the document.
And your timeline is within the next several months.
Yeah, it's soon.
You would be wanting to do this, and so I'd like to to have regular updates from you as to how things are going, so that we have at least one residential center open. And the thing that happened with regard to this facility was that although Congress in the appropriation measure required the BOP to notify us when it makes significant changes involving our RRCs, including closures. And we learned about the closure of the Mahoney facility from the residents, not from BOP. So are you following those requirements to notify?
I believe in that case, the provider quit on us. And so we kind of got the word a little late also. But I'll double check that to make sure, because it is our responsibility to make sure you're aware of that. And if we drop the ball on that one, I do apologize, but I will double check.
And I think you noted that you do actively work with nonprofits, and you were asked this by one of my colleagues. And local and state governments work through the challenging issues such as zoning restrictions and finding a suitable location. That this is all part and parcel. It's not as though you take the position, well, you put out the bid and that's the end of it.
No, it's very difficult to get. I mean, everyone wants their inmates close to home before they're released, but no one wants them in their community. And so it is very difficult for zoning regulations and the NIMBY issue to get anyone to accept the halfway house in their area.
You testified that you are very committed to implementing the First Step legislation, First Step Act. There was a recent article in the Washington Post that the Justice Department, under Attorney General Barr's leadership, is undermining the implementation of the First Step Act by restricting the number of people eligible to benefit from early release under the law. And the article noted that current and former Justice Department officials had stated that Attorney General Barr has expressed concerns that it would drive up crime numbers and that the administration would be blamed. So is this kind of sentiment something that the Attorney General had expressed to you?
That is certainly not anything I've heard the Attorney General say. He has been absolutely supportive, as has been the Deputy Attorney General, in implementing this First Step Act. And so I don't know, I have never heard those words coming from the Attorney General.
Apparently, people who are currently on your staff and other officials have heard that, and so that would be a major concern to me. And may I just add that you were asked questions about what happens to your female employees, and I'm sure that they represent a relatively small percentage of all of the employees that you have within the BOP. And I would encourage you, of course, to commit to making sure that the kind of training that you're providing, particularly to male staff who do not come to the aid of the female staff, that you do everything you can to change the culture so
I agree,
that
Senator.
this kind of behavior stops.
I agree.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Kennedy?
Thank you, Madam Chairman, Chairwoman. And thank you, Madam Director, for being here today. We have a federal correctional facility in Louisiana at Oakdale, Louisiana, that you're probably familiar with. We're having huge staffing problems, which doesn't make sense in light of my state's unemployment rate, which relative to other states is very high. Would you mind if I contacted your staff and talk about that and see what help we can get? I think part of the problem is in the bureaucracy. Would that be okay?
Sure, but I can tell you, Senator, that right now Oakdale is staffed at 94%. It's not about 94.8%. And they're down 30 positions. I kind of had a thought you might raise this. They're down 30 positions. About half of that is correctional officers. And one of our problem with filling our positions is that when I indicated we doubled our size.
Let me stop you. Okay. I want to have a
very good
long meeting with you.
I will give you lots of information.
Okay. All right. Because I have a couple of other questions.
Okay.
What is, in your opinion, is justice?
Ooh, that's a heavy question. I would assume that that people are treated fairly and that fair and equitable consequences occur if one violates the rights of another. And we should be able to anticipate that and expect that from our system?
Well, when somebody, to me, justice is when someone gets what they deserve.
Right.
The Uyghurs in China deserve religious liberty, and I think it's unjust not to give it to them. In terms of crime and punishment, a wrongful act, do you think we should view that as a sickness that should be cured, or a consequence, or a wrongful act, the consequence of which deserves punishment?
I think the latter is very true. Unfortunately, in some situations, the former statement, like in terms of pedophiles and sex offenders, and some of those whose behavior has been deemed by the Psychiatric Association to be at the root of that as a psychiatric or mental health issue, then it needs to be looked at as both. But either way, the consequences should match the offense.
Okay. Tell me the best procedure in your judgment, and you've got a lot of experience, and I can tell from your testimony today that you know what you're talking about. I think most people would agree that justice sometimes needs to be tempered with mercy.
I agree.
In the federal prison system, how best do we do that? And who should do it?
Senator, as I mentioned earlier, we have no control over who comes into our institutions or when they get out. So in terms of, I'm simply saying, so the coming in and going out.
You're queen for a day. Forget about the current law.
But within our institution, we all have the responsibility to treat our inmates with mercy and compassion. Because, as I said earlier, we believe that an inmate's reentry journey begins the day they join.
Madam Director, but our time's so limited. I'm talking in terms of determining when somebody should get out early.
Yeah. That's what we don't have control over when somebody gets out.
I'm asking you who should, based on your considerable experience.
I think the individuals that have been elected or appointed to the top ranks of our whole criminal justice and our law system of law in this country have the responsibility to make those kinds of decisions.
Well, but we don't. Congress didn't. Congress didn't in the First Step Act. We turned it over to you folks.
No.
And we turned it over to the Justice Department.
You gave us authorities, you gave us abilities.
Sure.
To kind of like to.
Yeah, but you exercise the judgment.
Well, but that's right. But that judgment is very much driven by specific parameters within which we have to work.
They're very vague.
Okay. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to answer this in an acceptable manner to you, Senator, because I think you know.
Okay, let me just hit one last lick on Jerry Epstein, and how can I put this? Christmas ornaments, drywall, and Jerry Epstein. Name 3 things that don't hang themselves. That's what the American people think. That's what the American people think. And they deserve some answers. And I know that you're not in charge of these investigations.
Yes, sir.
But you talk to the people who are. And I need you to take a very respectful message today. Tell the American people what happened. And don't rush it so that they don't do a thorough investigation. But you and I both know they can make this a top priority and get it done more quickly than they normally would. They need to do that. And I'd like you to deliver that message.
I agree with you, sir, but I have no control. I mean, I can pass along the message, but the FBI and the Inspector General's office work on their own time frame. But I will definitely give you their message, because I want the investigations completed as soon as possible, too, so that we can act.
I have a feeling you know how to be firm.
Little bit.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Coons?
Thank you, Ranking Member Feinstein. Thank you, Director Sawyer, for your service and your vigorous testimony today and your leadership of the Bureau of Prisons. I have 5 different questions I'm going to try and get through if I can in our time. The First Step Act expects the Bureau of Prisons will expand its internal program offering.
Absolutely.
And Senator Durbin demonstrated graphically ways in which many of the recently released prisoners did not have access to the kinds and scope of programming that the First Step Act imagines. We have in Wilmington something called the Wilmington Hope Commission that provides terrific reentry services, and the partnerships that I am hoping BOP will be expanding will deliver evidence-based reentry services, whether it's training or treatment or other preparation for reentry to our community and reduction in recidivism. Can you tell me something about what you think you really need in terms of funding for it, and what kind of partnership agreements with outside organizations you may have started with local nonprofits, which allow you to deliver those services in a more cost-effective way, or with faith-based organizations that can also help with reduce the operating cost?
Well, I think your mention of your program in Delaware, one of the things that's always been very difficult for us to attain in the Bureau of Prisons are the community programs that are going to welcome these inmates back into their community with jobs, housing, not that they have to provide them with the housing, but at least allow them to live in their neighborhoods. Right. And so the community piece, we always say there's a 3-legged stool. The inmate has to want to change. We have to provide opportunities for change, and then the community has to embrace them when they come back out again. Right. So I think a lot of our work needs to be on the reentry side in the community, where we can get halfway houses. Like we were saying, we tried desperately to get them, but nobody wants them in their neighborhood. No one wants them near them. And then programs to assist those inmates when they come back into the community. Those are a critical piece of the whole operation.
Well, yesterday in Wilmington, something called Second Chance Farm had its grand opening. It's very close to our nearby prison, and it's an opportunity to do urban farming for those who have just been released in a supervised setting that I think is an inspiring model. Let me just say that initially, $75 million was provided by Congress for the BOP programs that First Step Act imagined. I think you testified recently that you may require double that. Some outside groups are looking for something more like $400 million for these programs. I joined CJS Apprope's chair and ranking Senators Moran and Shaheen in a letter in April saying, we want your active feedback so that we can adequately fund and engage with you in delivering these services so that the First Step Act can be effective.
As I indicated, the only thing that's going to impede our ability to provide all the services that the inmates need are going to be resources. You know, we're hoping for more than $75 million this coming year, but I think we're going to be I think that with the markups that are there right now, I know we're still under continuing resolution, but I think we're going to probably get about $75 million again. The $75 million from this last year did not come from Congress. We had to eat that out of our own Bureau of Prisons budget. So if we don't get the kind of resources we need to make these things happen, I know at the end of the day, you're all going to be yelling at us because we don't have the programs. But the reality is if we don't have the resources, we can't make the things happen.
The reason we sent that letter to you was to explicitly ask for your clear input to us about how much more you may well need.
Thank you.
Let me move to solitary confinement. The Justice Department and many who study criminal justice have concluded that solitary confinement causes serious and long-lasting harm and should only be used as necessary, not as a default disciplinary tool. The First Step Act ended the use of solitary confinement in juvenile settings.
Right.
Given the demonstrated harm Why do we still have 10,000 inmates, about 7% in restricted housing, given that that's a more expensive form? Is it really the last option in terms of discipline?
We are working very diligently, I swear to you, since I got back here, to try to get those numbers down where they need to be. The problem, you've got inmates that are in there because they've been bad actors, and then they're in there for their punishment period. They get 30, 60 days in lockup. That's only about maybe 3,000 of the 10,000. The remaining ones are in there for protective custody reasons. They have chose to lock up because they were afraid on the compound. They're in there because we've got so many security threat groups and gangs that if we let them out, they're all going to kill each other or fight each other. And so we're working desperately to come up with other alternatives. We have reintegration housing units. We're going to start 4 of them in Senator Durbin's new institution in Thompson. We have 10 of them. We have 10 new ones going to come online. We have 4 already operational. We have transition units. We have de-ganging units that are trying to break down the gangs.
Director,
we're going to split the yard.
I'd welcome more input from you on that. Senator Durbin, Booker,
we'll tell you
Harris,
all about all of
them. Have a Solitary Confinement Reform Act. We'd love to hear more from you about that.
Perfect, Senator.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, 2 quick concluding questions. I'm the co-chair of the Law Enforcement Caucus. You have significant vacancies and staffing shortages that have led to folks who are not, I think, appropriately trained being required to serve as prison guards, which have contributed or may have contributed to something about which you've been asked at great length here. How many BOP facilities use augmentation, which is the word for pushing people who aren't regularly corrections officers into that role? And are employees temporarily serving in guard positions expected to continue to perform their regular jobs on an ongoing basis? And then what's the impact on mental health and suicide risk for those who are performing these corrections functions that are very stressful and very demanding?
Senator, I know a lot of interest has been raised in our augmentation process. Augmentation in and of itself is a wonderful thing. We train all of our staff as correctional workers first. When I was a psychologist, I didn't have officers in my treatment therapy groups. We don't have officers in the teachers' classrooms. We don't have officers in the kitchens cooking where the food service people are cooking foods. We don't have officers walking around with our plumbers and electricians as they teach other inmates. We are all trained to be correctional workers first. We all have that responsibility. When I came up through the system, had I not augmented posts, when I became an associate warden and a warden, I would have been very ill prepared to take on those responsibilities. But I had sat in the seats of correctional officers numerous times during my growth in the Bureau, and you get insights that you wouldn't have otherwise. Now, augmentation is very bad when you have to do it too much, and that's what's been happening more recently with our number of vacancies. We've been having to augment too often, and what happens then is the staff who are from the other posts, they know how to do the job. That is, they're trained to do that job, but you're right, the work from their other job is getting limited in terms of what they can accomplish. And so that's when I said earlier, we have put such huge strains on the Bureau of Prisons trying to accomplish its mission with the dramatic growth we've had, the budget cuts, the staffing shortages. It's just been incredible to me that the Bureau has been able to function during the last 16 years that I've been gone. At a very high level, in most respects, they have been functioning with the severe strain that's been placed on our system. Augmentation is a good thing. Don't take it away from us, but we have to get our staff positions filled so that we do not have to augment as often as we do right now.
And I'm concerned we have lost more law enforcement officers to suicide than line of duty deaths the last 3 years in a row. I am concerned about what we're doing to provide appropriate support, training, and staffing, because I think we are really pushing folks beyond their ability comfortably to perform. So,
Senator Lee.
Thank you.
Oops.
Thanks so much for being here, and thank you for your willingness to serve in a part of government that's not easy, in a part of government that's so essential for the safety of our country. This is often a thankless task.
Absolutely.
I want to talk to you in a moment about the First Step Act and about its implementation, about what we can do to make sure that it's helping to make Americans safe. I want to talk for a moment, though, about the Jeffrey Epstein case. There are a lot of indications. There are a lot of people who have expressed concerns culminating in the phrase, Jeffrey Epstein didn't kill himself. It was initially reported that he had died by suicide, but according to a whole lot of news reports, a private pathologist who took a look at the case said that Mr. Epstein experienced a number of injuries that are as he put it, quote, extremely unusual in suicidal hangings and could occur much more commonly in homicidal strangulation. Are you familiar with that statement?
I have seen that in the media, yes.
According to news reports, security cameras that were in the hallway watching Mr. Epstein's cell just happened to malfunction the night that his life ended. Can you tell me how frequently do prison guards, do prison guarding security cameras malfunction like this, and what are the protocols to check on them and to make sure that that doesn't happen?
Senator, we are very behind in terms of monies for improvements throughout our institutions. You know, as I mentioned earlier in my opening statements, our institutions are very old and a lot of the systems are faulty. Just in the last year, we were able to come up with enough money to redo all the camera systems in all of our institutions. It's not completed quite yet, but we did get the funding to replace all of our camera systems. We upgraded them from analog to digital, and we have a lot more cameras now in the institutions than there used to be, because we used to have a lot of blind spots, because we just didn't have adequate cameras. MCC New York is one of those. It is like partway through its whole camera reinstallation, and so by this time next year, we should have all of our institutions should be completely upgraded in terms of cameras.
Okay.
So when they're faulty, they do break down sometimes, to answer your question.
When they break down, you can't see it. And so if given that the security cameras malfunctioned that night, how can we be sure that he did kill himself?
Sometimes you can see some, and it's just the visibility on an old analog camera is grainy, and that's usually the problems that occur, is that you can see what's going on, it's just grainy, and it's harder to identify precisely what you're seeing on some of our old cameras.
Some of what was going on in this case?
I don't know about this case, because I was not allowed to see any of the cameras after it occurred, sir.
Why is that?
Because the Inspector General and the FBI's office are the ones investigating, and we are not allowed to touch anything. Once a situation occurs and the FBI and the Inspector General's office comes in, we are not allowed to talk to staff or have any interaction with what's going on in their investigation.
Until after the OIG?
Until it's finished, yes. We will know once the investigation.
Do you have any idea how long that'll be?
No, we keep hearing soon, and I don't know how long soon is.
Okay. One of the concerns I have is that it's my understanding that at the time of his death, he was in a high-security housing unit, one that was supposed to be checked every 30 minutes. And that from what I'm told, it appears that hours went by, possibly 3 hours or so went by without anyone checking on him. If that is true, would that have represented a lapse of protocol?
A lapse of a lot of things, Senator. Protocol, policy following, lots of very negative things if staff are not doing their rounds and their cell checks as they're supposed to be doing.
Okay. Is there a correlation between deaths in these high-security housing units and the failure to make timely checks on inmates according to Bureau of Prisons protocols?
As I indicated earlier, the average deaths in a jail facility, like these higher security pretrial facilities, the average in the country, and the jails across the country right now, is 50 per 100,000 inmates. We had 2 in a jail facility in the past year, 2, which suggests in the vast majority of our institutions we are doing things correctly and are making our checks. Now in our special housing units and our other institutions, we have had a couple of instances where when we went back and looked at the cameras after something untoward had occurred, it was not always clear that the officers had done specifically what we were asking them to do by policy. And in each case when that occurs, we call in the Inspector General's office, we have an investigation done, and if it appears to be any type of criminal act occurring, then we call in the U.S. Attorney's Office and the FBI, and we will prosecute if people are not doing their jobs.
Mr. Chairman, my time just expired. I've got one short question on the First Step Act implementation. Can I ask that? I'll take that as a yes.
Next, and I have no objection.
Thank you. Thank you. What efforts has the Bureau made to ensure that inmates are receiving incentives under the First Step Act for the programming that in which they're currently participating?
Well, the earned credits that they will get toward earlier release are built right into the program, and it's all identified in the First Step Act. If you complete X number of hours and X number of programs, then you get, there's a correlation of how many credits you're supposed to be getting toward early release. There are some inmates who are not going to be eligible for the First Step Act. Your violent offenders, your sex offenders, some of those have been excluded by Congress. But we're actually trying to build in incentives to those individuals, too, to encourage good behavior. They may get extra phone time to be able to call home. They may be able to get extra benefit in the trust fund program to be able to purchase some items. We're trying to incentivize all the inmates because it's beneficial to us on one hand because it makes for better behavior by the inmates, but the main focus is on the ones who are trying to work their way out of the prison system. And as long as they get involved in the programs and complete the programs, then the earned credits are an automatic addition to their...
It makes your job easier, makes the public safer.
Absolutely.
Lowering the crime rate.
If we can eliminate our numbers dramatically, we would be very happy.
Thank you very much. I was honored to be involved in the First Step Act, and I appreciate your willingness to implement it faithfully.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Welcome, Director.
Welcome. Welcome.
Senator Cornyn and I were the two authors of the reentry part of the First Step Act, so we obviously have a very keen interest in its implementation and its success. I will relate to you at least my experience, which is that during the battle for that bill, your organization was something less than a champion for our piece of it. But we ended up passing the bill with huge bipartisan majorities. I will tell you that I think the reentry piece was actually an even easier and stronger and more bipartisan piece than the sentencing part. So I think we sent a pretty strong bipartisan signal that we wanted to get this done. There was a meeting afterwards that Senator Cornyn was unable to attend, but was able to send a staff person to with Mr. Kushner, with the DAG, Deputy Attorney General, with senior people at the Bureau of Prisons, with people from the White House who'd been involved in working on this bill, to send a message that we want to see this implemented. So I hope that we were in pretty good shape, and certainly your comments today show, I think, real seriousness about it. But I'm worried that the people within the Bureau who may not have been champions of this bill are still perhaps trying to interfere with the implementation down in the ranks. And the most obvious way is to not ask for additional funding and then blame the lack of additional funding for not going forward. There's a recent survey done of 280,000 of your inmates as part of developing the new assessment tool. And the report was that 49% of them had not completed any programs before they were released. 82% had not participated in technical or vocational courses. And 57% who needed drug treatment had not received it. So there's obviously a huge opportunity here to improve on those numbers. And you have said in your testimony today, the First Step Act provides us with the opportunity to add new programs and enhance and expand existing programs. I'm all for that. But in a staff level briefing, the BOP told us that they currently have no plans to expand their program offerings. So I don't know quite where we are here, but when your testimony says we want to do new programs to implement this new bill that had such bipartisan support, when you see this need in your own survey, and then we hear from your staff that you got no plans to do any new programs, it's a little hard to figure out what's going on here.
Senator, I am completely mystified because I know of no staff in the Bureau of Prisons who are saying we don't want to increase our programs. And so if I can get the names of those people, I'd love to hear about it because that is not at all where we are in the Bureau of Prisons. I know my staff well enough to know we are not saying those things. We may not be increasing them until we get the funding to do it, but we are absolutely prepared to increase. Now, when those numbers mystify me that Senator Durbin had in terms of the ones who have never been involved in programs. I know we get a lot of lower security inmates that are with us such a short period of time that they don't have time to get involved in programs. We also have a lot of white collar offenders who come into us very skilled and very successful in their businesses. They just chose to go the illegal route for a while, and they don't really need the programs. And there are inmates that are doing life sentences that simply choose not because they're not going to need a good job on the outside, so they don't get involved in vocational training. But for the vast majority of our inmates, we have lots of programs out there education, vocational training, therapeutic programs for the inmates to get involved in. We don't have enough, no question about it, we don't have enough. And as I said earlier, the only thing that's going to impede us is the resources to offer enough programs so that all inmates can be involved.
We need to make sure that the budget that you're requesting aligns with those priorities, because it doesn't help us when the administration comes in with a budget that does not support the additional resources that we need.
Right.
It is a setback. We do have appropriators who will pay no attention to particularly bad recommendations in administration budgets on both sides of the aisle. This is a bipartisan phenomenon, but it really, I think, is important. And with respect to one particular piece of this, the medication-assisted treatment,
right.
Rhode Island is probably the national leader right now in getting medication-assisted treatment to prisoners before release. We've dramatically reduced death by overdose within that population, but we use the whole array of approved medical interventions.
Mm-hmm.
BOP, we understand, offers primarily only one drug, which is called Vivitrol. You're trying to expand the medication-assisted treatment program,
yes,
you say, but you only requested an additional $1 million and no additional staff to expand the availability of medication-assisted treatment in the FY 2020 budget. So this is the kind of example where it's frustrating for us to have you say, we really want to do this, it makes sense, we know it works, we've seen the cases out there where it saves lives and improves people's recidivism when they're out, and then when the rubber really hits the road in the budget you request, you undercut yourself with a budget request that doesn't accomplish the goals you state you wish to achieve.
Senator, part of the limitations on us in terms of the other drugs right now that you would provide to inmates coming into the institution, we don't have the authorities to provide those. HHS and DEA have very strict restrictions, and I'm sure your state has already managed to get those authorities. We are working diligently with HHS and DEA because a lot of times for us, it's a matter of moving these drugs across state lines because our institutions are everywhere and our inmates release everywhere and they come from everywhere. And so we're working very diligently to get the proper licensure and procedures to do it on the front end. Right now, we are still ensuring the inmates get the medicine, but if they come in and we review their case with their outside doctors and our doctors, we take them downtown where there is a prescriber who can prescribe that medication for us. So part of what we need to move forward on this is simply the licensure agreement for our own staff. The inmates are still getting the drugs. We're simply having to take the inmate out into town to get it prescribed for them.
Can Congress help you here?
Pardon me?
Can Congress help you in this regard?
Right now, I think we can get it. We thought we were going to have to come up for a modification of the law, but I think we're very close to getting the final approval from HHS and DEA on both the buprenorphine and the methadone. If that doesn't work, I'll come and talk with you.
Well, let's just make sure that there's no little counterinsurgency going on against this in your administration.
I swear, Senator, there is not, and if there is and I find it, they'll be working somewhere else.
Okay, thanks.
Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me, I want to introduce into the record Council of Prison Locals 33 Western Region letter. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you so much. We appreciate that you're there. And it's easy to see why General Barr wanted you to come out of retirement and come back. Jeffrey Epstein's come up a lot. It is something that does concern us because we do have victims, women, young girls, that are never going to see justice fully because of his death. And you've mentioned that all of your high-profile inmates are treated the same. So I want to pivot to the staff. And Senator Coons had started on some of this. And let's look at policies and procedures for staff for handling these high-profile or suicidal inmates. Do you have written protocols that are there to be followed, a standard operating procedure, even if you're augmenting staff, that everybody knows this is how it's done? Is that in existence?
Yes, it is. In all of our special housing units or any of our secure units, there are post orders right at the front entry, right in the officers' quarters, and every staff member is expected to read that every time they come on post. We also do regular training with the staff that are in there, but for those that are augmenting, those post orders on a daily basis should remind them of what the requirements are on those posts.
So staff would have full awareness of what the expectation is?
Yes.
Thank you. So then staffing shortages, and I understand that you are facing those. How is that affecting your ability? And then the staffing shortages that you have, what are you all doing to alleviate that? Have you changed recruiting practices?
Yes. Since I've been back for now 3 months, that's when my highest priority is getting our positions filled. Prior to that, we had actings in the role, good people doing good things, but acting directors just don't have the power or the authority to make things happen the way a full director can. I've managed to get extra authorities from the Department of Justice, and we're working through OPM to get direct hiring authorities so that our staff at the institutions can directly hire people from the street. We do not have that authority right now, and that would advance us greatly. We've also added 20 new staff. I've given authority to hire 20 new staff at our staffing processing center in Texas. A lot of those are going to be retirees because we can bring them back from retirement. They're already trained. They're already skilled. We can bring them back for a year or two that we need them, and then we can let them go back to retirement. I've been experienced with that, coming back from retirement and going back to work, and that will work very well for us. We've added 10 new staff we're hiring because we know we're going to have retirements coming in the next year in our staffing offices, so we're doing that. We're advancing our recruitment strategies. We've just hired Accenture, a company, to do a nationwide online recruiting program for us because that's where the young people go looking for jobs. We have some things online, but not as splashy as we need to have to try to attract the young folks out there to come work with us. We are doing everything that we can possibly think of to try to speed up our recruitment process and our hiring process. One of the things that's hurting us, as I mentioned, that we hired 15,000 employees when I was director before in that 10-year period. Those staff are all now eligible to retire. And so many of them are retiring at the same time we're trying to hire new staff. And so we hire 5 new staff and 3 retire, and you hire 10 new staff and 4 retire. So it's hard for us to catch up. We've hired 2,500 employees in this past year, 2,500, which should be a lot. But when you have a fair number of tridding out the back end through retirements or whatever other reasons, it's been very difficult for us to catch up.
Okay, and as you are hiring new staff, what is the length of training that they are given before they're put on the job?
Okay, we have 2 weeks of institution familiarization training. Some have increased that to 3 weeks. We have 3 weeks of training at our Federal Law Enforcement Training Center in Glencoe, Georgia. So that's 6 weeks. What the ideal and what we used to be able to do is link a probationary employee to a seasoned employee that they can kind of follow them and shadow them for a while to really learn the job thoroughly. Unfortunately, with our staffing shortages, we're not able to do that in all of our instances. But as we staff up our institutions, we will be able to return to that. And then we also have annual training every year that every staff member has to go through that is all the basics of corrections and the things that they need to know and requirements. And then we have incidental training throughout the year or incremental training throughout the year in lots of different positions.
Staffing is one of the most acute issues that you came in facing.
2, staffing and training, because when our budgets got cut dramatically, what's one of the first things to go? You cut your training budgets. And so we're having trouble filling positions. We've got a lot of new employees. And if we can't train them adequately, what you were suggesting earlier, they're on their job, but they may not know everything they need to know to do that job effectively. And those are the 2 areas that I'm really stressing dramatically to try to get us caught up.
Okay. I've got a question on contraband, and I will submit that to you for writing, but okay. I think the fact that you have people like El Chapo or Martin Scarelli, who is still running his business out of prison, or a drone that is dropping cell phones. Right. This is something that we need to help you solve.
Yes.
And I will submit that for a written response. Yield back.
Excellent. Very good.
Thank you. Senator Cornyn.
Dr. Sawyer, let me join my colleagues in thanking you for returning to public service. You talked about the importance of faith-based programming in our prisons, but it seems to me that you're engaged in a faith-based exercise here. But let me remind you, like John McCain used to remind us, your reward will not be on earth. So several years, maybe 10 years ago now, I remember meeting with a number of pastors in the Dallas area, and African-American pastors. I asked them, what's the single biggest problem you have in your congregation? So it's young men who are convicted felons, who, after they leave prison, they can't get a job.
Absolutely. And
they can't find a place to live. And it occurred to me, if you can't get a job and you can't find a place to live, your choices are extraordinarily limited. And so
looking at some of the work that's been done at the state level. Senator Whitehouse and I and other colleagues here, actually it was almost unanimous, joined together and passed the First Step Act. And this is a aspirational goal of making sure that people, once they leave prison, which almost everybody will, that's another factoid that many people overlook. People will leave prison. The question is, are they better prepared than when they went in? And we can't save everybody, but we can save some. And the numbers look pretty encouraging from the state experience. But one of the things I want to ask you about is, in my state, in Texas, for example, we not only looked at what happens in prison, but we look at what happened after people got out of prison. And this is a part I want to make sure we don't drop the ball on, Congress, I mean. Your responsibilities perhaps end once they leave your premises, but we need to make sure that there are follow-on services, monitoring, and assistance to people who continue to need reinforcement and help, because if they go back in the same neighborhood or subject to the same old temptations and influences, they're going to end up back in your custody. Right. So do you agree with me that it's important for Congress not to just pat ourselves on the back and say we passed the First Step Act, but rather we need to also follow through by providing follow-on services for this population?
I think it's excellent, Senator. As I mentioned to the Senator earlier, you know, we can look at it as a three-legged stool. We can provide programs for inmates to better themselves. The inmates have to choose to do that, but then the third stool is the community they're going back into. And if there's not a welcoming community there that deals with housing issues and job issues and all those kinds of things, then the whole stool is going to fall over, because the inmates cannot succeed if they're going back into their same drug-ridden or whatever it might be neighborhoods. They don't have a place to live. They're not allowed to live in public housing. They're not allowed to do this. They're not allowed to do that. It's very difficult for them to succeed, and we see them coming back to us when they left us very optimistic, with skills in hand, education in hand, and then they come back because what they found outside was not what they were hoping would be there for them.
In the run-up to the passage of the First Step Act, we heard from former Attorney General Michael Mukasey, who I think made a really important point. He said it's easy to get confused by what the ultimate goal is, and he encouraged us to keep our eye on the crime rate. If the crime rate was coming down, we were obviously making some progress. If it was going up, well, something obviously was going wrong. Do you agree with that focus?
I think that's certainly one of the things you need to look at very closely, sir, yes.
And finally, Dr. Sawyer, Senator Whitehouse, as you heard, he and I are sort of the odd couple on prison reform, like Senator Leahy and I are on freedom of information issues.
Who supplies the odd?
I'll leave that to others to judge. But we are introducing some additional legislation to promote successful reintegration and rehabilitation of prisoners by introducing something we call the Re-Enter Act. What we are trying to do is provide federal judges the authority, the discretion, really. We're not requiring it. We're providing them discretion to issue their own certificates of rehabilitation and acknowledge that eligible offenders have finished their sentences and demonstrated their commitment to a law-abiding future. We're looking at the state experience, and about a third of the states have a similar program. And I'm glad that, just like the First Step Act, this seems to enjoy broad bipartisan support. Senators Lee, Leahy, Grassley, Durbin, Tillis, Coons, Portman, Blumenthal, Crapo, and Ernst so far have joined us in the introduction of this bill. Do you see the usefulness of giving federal judges this discretion, maybe as an additional indicator to the public that this individual has tried to turn their lives around, taken advantage of the programming, and needs to be welcomed back into the community, as you point out?
Yes, Senator, I'm not familiar with your bill. I'd look forward to looking at it. I'm still catching up with a lot of new stuff that's happened in the last 16 years. I'm very happy to look at it. Anything that improves the process, anything that makes us all work together on doing the right things for offenders, the ones who are going to coming back to the community, I applaud all of your efforts, all of our efforts to make that successful.
Thank you again.
Senator Tillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Sawyer, thank you for being here and your service. How would you describe the morale of folks in BOP right now?
You know, it's kind of mixed, Senator. I've been trying to get around and visit some of our institutions, talk to our staff, and talk to our management staff around the Bureau as well as the line staff, and it's mixed. We have a mixture of staff who are tired because they're having to work extra hours and work so hard and so long. But the staff that I've interacted with, they are still the driven, good quality Bureau of Prisons people who really want to do a good job. They know that we're in a profession. We don't get any glory. You know, the FBI gets glory, DEA gets glory, they all get glory. Prison people only get noticed when something bad goes wrong. You never read an article about us that's positive, or very rarely, and those are usually in local little papers.
So, Dr. Sawyer, would you rate the caliber of the people working out there, the vast majority of them good, hard-working people?
Vast majority, super. We've got some knuckleheads, and we want to screen out those knuckleheads.
Yep.
But the vast majority of our staff, but they are tired because they are stretched, and we have been stretched for many years.
I just want to make sure that that's heard by them. I'm sure some are watching your testimony. I would like, maybe as a follow-up, the two charts that Senator Durbin put forth. I think it would be very helpful, maybe as a response for the record, to take a look at that data and decompose it into what are the root causes behind it. Is it as stark and as bad as it appears to be? Are there other mitigating factors? Because if it is, then that's something we need to look at. If there are other mitigating factors, I think it would be helpful for the committee.
Very good, sir.
What's your attrition rate net of retirements?
Yeah,
you mean get rid of
people who
retirements.
retire?
What kind of attrition are you dealing with outside of just current course and speed on retirement?
I don't have those numbers with me, but I do know most of our staff can retire at 50. We're hazardous duty law enforcement retirement. Most of them stick around till 54, so they don't run out the door right away. We have added some new incentives to try to encourage. We've added pay incentives for those who will stick around once they've reached retirement eligibility to get them to stick around another year longer. I did a video out to all of our staff recently on a lot of issues, and one of them was to try to beg our retirees to give us one more year or 2 or 3 to stick around a little longer because we need their experience and to help us, tide us over until we get the other positions filled.
Thank you. I'm probably going to submit some specific questions for the record around reentry centers. We had a center in Charlotte, North Carolina that had a stellar record that recently closed. It looked like it was probably a combination of funding as well as a drop in the prisoner reductions. So in some respects, it almost sounded like some of the mechanics you were working through in answer to Senator Hirono's questions.
Right.
But
I'm prepared to answer that for you if you want it. Otherwise, I can do it in writing.
I figured you would be.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That facility closed on us. We didn't know they were going to close. They actually defaulted on their contract, and a lot of it was financial because we had a cap of a maximum number they could hold of 75, but we only guaranteed a lower number, and they wanted us desperately to get up to that 75, but we can't control where the inmates are going to come from and what communities are going to release into, so we just didn't have those numbers to give them. So they defaulted on their contract and left us, and so we're now in the process of trying to do statewide contracts so that we have the same deliverer in multiple sites around the state so that if one needs bodies and they can kind of shift around, that is already in process and should be. Pardon me?
A more diverse portfolio
yes,
within a
yes,
state.
thank you. And that should be coming out very, very soon. It's closing soon. We believe we have the vendors that are going to step up and bid on that. And we right now in Charlotte, we have a halfway house 20 miles from Charlotte and another one a little farther out. So the inmates who are from the Charlotte area are going to those two facilities. Yep. But we really want to close this last contract and cover the...
I think something else will follow up in questions. It has to do with communication with probation officers. Sometimes they feel like they're getting a transfer without adequate notice or communication, but we'll just follow up
that's interesting.
And some specifics that's been reported by my staff. I know you're new to the job, so this is something I would just ask you all to look at. I think the First Step Act, I support it, and I'm supporting the additional efforts by Senator Cornyn and others. But I think it'd be very helpful. You mentioned that you have Accenture coming in working on the hiring practices. I think it'd be very helpful for you to go through an assessment of the First Act, what our expectations are imposed on you, what your current funding streams are, and where the objectives of the First Step Act could be challenged unless you get additional authorities or resources to backfill it. It's one thing to have a good policy trajectory. It's another thing to execute it. So I think an operational assessment on the likelihood of you coming before this committee and us being very happy with the implementation.
Or the other
to what extent does Congress need to further act to facilitate that implementation. And we'll look for that, maybe put together a letter on what I'm looking at, but basically just a operational assessment of your execution strategy. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your years of service.
Thank you.
Senator Hawley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Dr. Sawyer, for being here. Let me continue the theme of asking you about staffing issues. I know BOP has experienced some critical staffing shortages in recent years, including at the federal prison facility in Springfield, Missouri, in my home state. What measures has BOP implemented to avoid staffing shortages? Can you give us an update there?
Well, I mean, if you want to know where the staffing shortages came from, I mentioned earlier our rapid growth, our expansion of institutions. We have had position cuts dramatically over the years. One year in particular, we had opened 10 new institutions with 3,000 less positions than we had the year before. A couple of years ago, we had 5,000 positions removed from our numbers. And then what's happened in the last few years to result in the 3,000 vacancies we have right now, we had very uncertain budget years where we were projected that we were going to get significant cuts again in budget and staffing. And so the leaders at the time of this organization were wary about hiring up too much because we didn't want to have to rift a whole lot of people if when the budget year came out, our budgets had been cut dramatically. Add to that the attrition that we're having with staff. As I said, we hired 15,000 employees during the 10 years that I was director from 92 to 2003. They are now eligible to retire. And so a lot of those are going out the door where we're desperately trying to fill them up on the front end. And that's how we ended up where we are today. But what we've done is, since I've been here and prior to my arrival, we've added lots of incentives for hard-to-fill locations, financial incentives. I've increased our staffing numbers at our Grand Prairie office that does most of the screening for our new hires. We've increased that by 20 of former retirees who can come in for a short period of time, a year or 2 or 3, to get us caught up. They're already trained, they're ready to go, they can start. We are hiring 10 new staff down there to get it up. We've got new recruitment activities going on. As the Senator mentioned, we were using Accenture to develop a very splashy online recruitment package for us to tap the young people. We're approaching, and we're hiring contractors to help us with the staffing levels. We're doing everything we can possibly think of. We've got new authorities from the Department of Justice. One thing, by bringing me in as director, the Attorney General assured me that I would have the full support of the Department of Justice to get the Bureau of Prisons back on solid ground, and they have definitely delivered on that. We're getting some new authorities for hiring. We're doing everything we possibly can. We hired 2,500 new staff in this past year, but at the same time, we attrited out some other staff. So, as we're hiring in new ones, we're losing some others, and it's just hard for us to catch up. We will get there, but it's taking us a little. And then the hiring process, the federal hiring process, is extremely long and onerous. And it can take 6 months to a year from the time you recruit someone or you identify someone to actually get them on board and into your operation. Then by the time we train them, get them ready to work, it's even longer out there. So it's a very difficult process.
Let me ask specifically about the Springfield, Missouri facility, because I'm worried there. That's, as you know, the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners. Can you speak to your progress there in staffing for medical and dental staff, including doctors, nurses, psychologists?
Yeah, I don't have the specific numbers on Springfield with me here today. I can get them all for you and tell you exactly. But one of our most difficult areas is health services. Doctors, nurses, dental to a certain extent. But the medical profession, it's stretched pretty thin across the whole country also, and no one's able to find as many as they need. That's why a lot of rural entities are losing their medical providers. And so we're competing, and we don't pay as much as a lot of other places can pay them. But I can get you those very specific numbers on Springfield, sir.
Thank you. Let me go back to the numbers you mentioned just a moment ago. The hiring freeze, as I understand it, caused BOP to lose 5,000 jobs. In your House testimony, you stated that BOP is actively seeking to hire employees for 3,000 vacancies. That's a delta of 2,000, short of the 2017 staffing levels. So give us a sense of how you will adequately staff programs at your facilities in the meantime without resorting to augmentation.
Right. The 5,000 positions we lost was separate from the 3,000 vacancies we have right now. The 5,000 positions, they took the positions and everything away from us. The 3,000 positions, we have the positions, they're just empty. And the freeze affected that. The government shutdown affected that. Our uncertain budget years affected that because we were afraid to staff up for fear we would have to turn around and riff them the next year. That's what all went toward our 3,000 positions. We absolutely have to get those positions filled in order to meet all the requirements of the First Step Act, plus the new positions we're hoping for to meet the requirements of the First Step Act. And as I said, we're doing as many things as we can possibly think of and come up with to try to get get these positions filled. But it's going to be a reach for us to get all these positions on staff quickly enough. One of the other things we're looking to is a lot of the online kinds of programs, educational programs that our inmates can be involved in terms of that are not as staff intensive, but we can use other sources to provide the training and the education for our offenders, and you're not relying solely on staff members being present at the time to do that. So we're looking at everything we can possibly do to get our positions filled up, get the programs to the inmates, and as I said earlier, the only thing that's going to impede us is resources. As long as we can get adequate resources, we'll be fine.
Thank you, Dr. Sawyer. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Sawyer, welcome.
Thank you, sir.
You started in your position at BOP 9 days after the death of Jeffrey Epstein. What happened with Jeffrey Epstein was an enormous black eye to the BOP and to the Department of Justice. It was disgraceful. Jeffrey Epstein was a pedophile. He was a sexual predator who targeted and preyed on young girls. And yet he died in federal custody. He died in federal custody before he had a chance to testify about his crimes, about his wrongdoings, and about the other powerful men who were complicit in that sexual abuse. That was a moment that shocked this country. There were powerful men who wanted Jeffrey Epstein silenced. As I see it, there are two and only two possibilities for what happened with Jeffrey Epstein. Number one, there was gross negligence and a total failure of BOP to do its job, with a prisoner on suicide watch that led to Epstein's committing suicide. Or number two, something far worse happened. That it was not suicide, but rather a homicide carried out by person or persons who wanted Epstein silenced. Either one of those is completely unacceptable. Both of those are profound indictments of BOP and our federal incarceration system. Now, I understand there's an Inspector General investigation. I understand the Department of Justice is looking at this. But you came into an agency right after this happened, and as far as I'm concerned, when you came in, that was an agency in crisis. Let's take the more damning of the scenarios. Based on the evidence of which you're aware, is there any indication that Jeffrey Epstein's death was a homicide?
Based upon the evidence that I am aware, no. But as I've already told the committee, it is still being investigated by the FBI and the Inspector General's office. Once they initiate their investigation, we are required to remove ourselves completely from it. We're not allowed to talk to any staff members involved. We're not allowed to look at any evidence involved. And so I am not aware of very much regarding the Epstein investigation until it's completed. But there is no indication from anything I know that it was anything other than a suicide.
As I understand it, 2 prison guards were recently indicted for falling asleep when they were supposed to be on watch, for failing to engage in the periodic every 30-minute check on suicide watch on Jeffrey Epstein, and then falsifying their records to claim that they had in fact done their job when the allegation is they're now asleep. Is that right?
That's what I heard on the media today. I have gotten no official reporting of that yet at all.
Other than those 2 individuals, has anybody at BOP yet been disciplined or terminated for their conduct that led to the Jeffrey Epstein death?
We're still waiting for the conclusion of the investigation, Senator. We can't act on any of that until we have the evidence, the information. But I assure you, if there's any misconduct or if these individuals were indicted, we don't want people like that working in the Bureau of Prisons. They do not represent the vast majority of the 35,000 employees that across the Bureau of Prisons. Most of our staff are very high quality, good people that are doing the right thing. And you are right, this incident was a black eye on the entire Bureau of Prisons. And unfortunately, everyone takes a singular incident and paints the whole brush across the entire organization and assumes the entire organization is dysfunctional and incompetent. And that is absolutely not the case. We have some bad staff. We want rid of those bad staff who don't do their job. We want them gone one way or another, either by prosecution or by termination. But the good staff are doing extraordinary work out there every day managing the 177,000 inmates. You never hear anything about those people because they're doing their job and things are running well. The only time we ever get noticed is when something bad happens. And that's unfortunate.
Dr. Sawyer, let me say, given what occurred here, there is reason for a great deal of concern, and I understand the sentiments that you want to have the back of your team, and I understand those sentiments entirely. But we have 2 prison guards that have just been indicted for literally falling asleep on the job and then lying about it. And my question to you is, what have you done leading this organization to determine how many other prison guards have fallen asleep on the job, have lied about it? How many other video cameras installed to ensure safety and security are inoperative, as I understand the video cameras were inoperative with Epstein? What are you doing proactively to make sure this doesn't happen again?
Within a couple of weeks of my arriving on the job, I did a video program out to all of our employees, telling them very clearly that we don't know for sure what happened at the Epstein case because I don't have the information. But if any staff members out there are not doing their rounds effectively in special housing units, if they are not doing their counts effectively, and if they are signing documents that says they are doing things that they are not doing, not only is that a dereliction of duty, but it's a violation of the law. And we will discipline and we will prosecute if necessary. I made that position very clearly to all 36,000 of our employees out there. We, in terms of the camera issue, I mentioned earlier that we're right in the midst this past year into next year to replace all of our cameras across all of our institutions, going from analog to digital and increasing the number of cameras at all of our institutions. In the meantime, we knew our cameras were faulty in some locations. They're picking up what's happening, but it's not very clear. It's kind of a grainy analog kind of a view, which is never acceptable in investigations. So we are completely replacing all of our cameras in all of our institutions, and that should be completed sometime into this next coming year. We are making very clear, our management staff, all of our regional directors have been very clear with their, I sent out a letter to the wardens telling them very specifically in response to their staff that they need to repeatedly be telling their staff and reminding them and making sure the post orders and the requirements are very clear and evident to all of our employees of what their responsibilities are. And if they choose, if we have a training issue that our staff doesn't know how to do something, that's management's fault. We have to train those people. But if it's instances where people know and they're experienced and they simply choose not to do their job, then I want them gone. I want every one of them out of our institutions because they not only make the inmates unsafe, they make our employees unsafe too, and that is a completely unacceptable situation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. That will conclude the hearing. Dr. Sawyer, thank you for serving our country yet again, and I think you're the right person at the right time.
Thank you, Senator.